on collision building and movement building, and this is a session that we'll do in collaboration with our colleagues from not Publish What You Pay, but Stop the Bleeding. So it will be done in two aspects. We'll try to share some information that speaks to efforts that have been done at a continental level with regards to trying to put or bring together movements or civil society organizations onto a particular cause, but we'll also try to bring in a country-specific case that can help us to also pick some lessons. And the country of focus in this case will be Zambia. This follows the recent process that had been undertaken to form or bring together civil society organizations into an alliance called the Civil Society Debt Alliance.
So let me preface this conversation by sloganeering. So when I say Sisi, you respond Ndio Tuko, and we want to see the energy and the vibe behind that, because part of movement building is also believing in sloganeering, is also believing in a cause, having that energy to fight the injustice. Sisi. Hey, some more energy and battery. Sisi. Yeah, okay. So basically what Sisi Ndio Tuko means is that those that love reggae music, none but ourselves can set our minds free from this mental slavery that we are being subjected to. But also in the context that we are having this conversation, if you want to go biblical, there was a point when John sent a message to Jesus Christ that, are you who is to come, or we shall wait for another? And this is not the question that we are asking someone else, but we should ask ourselves the generational mandate that Francis Fanon talks about, that each generation have its own mission, either to discover it or to betray it. And if you look at ourselves right now, we are faced with a serious challenge or the crisis of a fiscal contract. The state is retreated in terms of basic service provision. It could be about health, it could be about education, water and sanitation, infrastructure such as transport, and so forth and so on. And it is hurting the poor the most. And this is a grievance that we are confronted with. And part of it is the inability of the state to mobilize the resources. Why am I bringing this conversation? I want us to have a historical appreciation when it comes to movement building. Right now, I've started to where we are, but looking back, you find that Africa has got a strong history of movement building to fight injustice such as slavery. When I say Africa, I also mean those also in diaspora. I'm not confined to the borders. We have also a strong history in terms of movement building, fighting colonialism. We have also a strong movement building, particularly in the debt, when we talk about the Jubilee movement. So there's nothing new we are talking about here. There are plenty of lessons to draw from how citizens have organized themselves in the past to fight this injustice that they are facing. And as of now, we are talking about opportunities, not only grievances, but opportunities that if we don't learn from history, then they are likely again to be squandered if we don't put our best foot forward. What do I mean here when I talk about opportunities? We are talking about, for instance, the element of the sunshine minerals. Some may call it critical, some may call them green energy or transition minerals. We are talking about Africa being endowed with the vast natural resources that are needed to transform the global crisis of dirty fuels to more cleaner energy. But if we are not rallying together, we also likely to squander this big opportunity. But let me now introduce the Stop the Bleeding campaign, some of the things that have been happening, the lessons that we can draw, and also the element of foresighting, which is also quite important in terms of movement building. I want you to reflect in the next minute, 60 seconds, if you want more. Can you write the word stop? S-T-O-P. For the Stop the Bleeding campaign, write the word stop. Rearranging all the 4 letters in stop. Can you come up with as many words as you can? It's just a 60-second exercise. Can you do a rearrangement of all the words in stop, S-T-O-P? How many words can you form using all the full letters in stop? Eight seconds gone. Yeah. Isaac, I'm not in the room physically, so I'm going to ask you just to pick some few hands, just to share what the words that you've managed to form. And to make it more participatory, one can just say one word and another word until we have exhausted the opportunity that we had.
Okay, comrade. This side, and there are some words we want to share. Post. Post is one of them. Spot is one of them. Tops. Inside. Pot. Pot is one of them. Op. Yes, comrade, can you hear me?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that has been the answers are on spot, right? So when we talk about the Stop the Bleeding, it is important to understand that how did the journey started. It started with the spot part of the bleeding. Spot the bleeding. You rearrange the Stop the Bleeding. You understand that the first thing that we have to do is to spot the bleeding. And it is through the high-level panel report, known as the Mbeki report, that we came to realize that Africa was profusely bleeding in terms of resources for development. Looking then at this massive figure that was being shared, that we're losing over 50 billion annually through illicit financial flows. And then when it comes to options, then we came to understand that Africa is a net creditor to the world. And what that meant is that the resources that we lose from this continent through illicit financial flows are more than what we get through foreign direct investment, through official development assistance. And more importantly, even this question of debt that we are grappling with now, the report shared then that if only a third of illicit financial flows could be kept and ring-fenced, then they were enough to wipe out the debt that the continent was facing. And even when you do current projections with the latest data, you understand that what we owe, or what Africa owes the world, is pales into significance if we track the losses that we have suffered from 1970 to 2018 as an example. So this is quite important to understand that within the options that we have to fight for a sovereignty when it comes to financing the continent's development, we have got no any other option. That's why it tops the agenda when it comes to development financing. And the part of it is also the understanding that who is the main contributor that is enabled because of the global unsustainable and just global financial architecture, which allows multinational corporations to continuously plunder the resources on the continent. I'm not going to delve deeper into this conversation because I believe earlier conversations have done justice to this area. But what is it about the ports? You know, when I was young, each and every time, and even now, I think, when I'm hungry, and then I see some activity taking place in the kitchen and the sound of the pots, it gives me the reassurance that something is about to happen in terms of addressing the stomach infrastructure. So when you talk about the agenda of the Stop the Bleeding campaign, we also talk about the pots. This is not an agenda or a conversation that is removed from the daily struggles. I'm sure those who are familiar with the Lord's Prayer understand that part of the message that we recite each and every time is, give us this day our daily bread. So when you talk about the Stop the Bleeding campaign, we are also talking about how people are affected. We humanize the impact of the unsustainable global financial system that cripples Africa's capacity or capabilities or fiscal capability to deliver when it comes to basic service provision. It's also important that we look at the post part of it. The idea behind Stop the Bleeding is not just to stop the bleeding. It is to stop the bleeding. It is about the post part of it, the Africa we want. Agenda 2063. Your national development strategies. You may be wondering why things are not coming, the pieces of the development puzzle at a national, at a sub-regional, and at a continental level are not coming together. And this is one of the greatest way or feasible way we can make the pieces come together by enhancing the fiscal contract that is currently broken, and enhancing that contract, that fiscal contract, from a feminist perspective. So what is movement building and what is it all about? I've started by saying that this is not a new phenomenon for Africa. Those that are familiar with the liberation struggle, that was part of also movement building. People rallying behind a certain grievance or injustice that they come together and believe that they should fight to claim their space, to claim their rights. It is about ensuring that citizens are at the driving seat when it comes to socio-economic policy change. Citizens are at the center of any change process that takes place. And this is very, very important in the sense that you may look at me, for instance, and see that I could be sick. But the idea is not to solve that problem, is not just to come up with a prescription. But in the process, you have to consult. You have to make consultation, not only from an ethical position, but from a moral, also from a legal position, and also from a political position. Meaning to say that the challenges that we are facing globally, for instance, when you talk about the global tax reform that are being led, that has been led so far by the OECD being a dominant player, we are saying it's not only about coming up with a prescription, but ethically, legally, and politically, the process must be consultative. It must be inclusive. Never mind whether that dosage which is being prescribed to us is helpful or not. But the first person of it is, are citizens at the center of the change agenda? To the debt crisis, the solutions that are being proposed, are we putting citizens at the center of, or the driving seat of, any social economic policy change process that is taking place? Right. And then retreating a bit to this Stop the Bleeding campaign, you find that as part of trying to ensure that there is vibrancy in terms of movement building, the manner in which the consortium under the Big Tent approach that steers the Stop the Bleeding campaign was the realization that if we cannot bring together what we deem as improper fractions, the different movements that are in place, and find that common interest to drive forward, then we will not bring the numbers that matter to bargain for the change process we want. And this is why we talk about, when you talk about the tax injustices, we flip them to look at them from a different multiple lens that you want. For instance, you can look at it from a wage evasion. I'm sure you've heard about the Marikana incident, when multinational corporations are doing economic witchcraft or financial witchcraft, which are all familiar in Africa. They can lead to grievances that can hit hardest the communities and the mining communities and labor. This is why we are saying any part of a fiscal contract that marginalizes the communities, that marginalizes labor, is unsustainable. So that's why we bring labor to this conversation. That's why we bring students to this conversation, the youth. That's why we bring the feminist perspective to this conversation. And this has been the attempt of the Stop the Bleeding campaign to ensure that even in mining communities, everyone must not be left behind when it comes to the bargaining process for change, trying to reclaim the role of the state insofar as the fulfilling feminist fiscal contract is concerned. So we have, for instance, the International Trade Union Confederation of Africa that looks at things from a labor perspective. We have organizations that represent other interests that have highlighted earlier on that are critical elements for reclaiming the fiscal contract that has now been disregarded. So what has the Stop the Bleeding campaign been doing beyond that? But it's also the growth in terms of, I will not say growth, but the evolution. That the journey first, it was about tax and illicit financial flows. When we talk about how we spotted the bleeding, the reference point is about tax and illicit financial flows. But along the way, we realized that there are multiple spots again in which Africa is bleeding resources. Debt becomes another component, which is quite critical for Africa to engage. This is why the work of the Stop the Bleeding campaign for the next 2 years is going to focus massively on debt. Then the other elements that are also crucial to this conversation are trade and investment, because they are at the center of domestic resource mobilization. If you cannot grow value, if you cannot add value to what you produce, definitely you are also eroding your capacity to mobilize resources. You are also getting to be vulnerable when it comes to some of the challenges that come from like foreign exchange risk that can make your debt also unsustainable. So that point I must underscore, that the Stop the Bleeding campaign has also changed in recognition of the weight of the challenges that Africa is facing because of the failure to the sovereign failure to finance your own development. And now this brings me now to the next conversation, that this is all about the people. It's not that complicated, and we must make sure that, like we said with the poets, how we try to do some storytelling, how we try to do poetry, how we try to bring music, how we try to bring fun to the whole conversation, puzzles, and everything that harnesses the power of arts to bring people together. I started this deliberately session by saying, let's play Survival, Bob Marley. And if you know very well, and which is a bit of disappointed, I'm a bit disappointed because maybe it's the view that I had, but when you listen to that song, it says, how can you be sitting down and telling me that you care? Oh, yes, you do. While every time I look around, I see people suffering and suffering in every way. And then this music is playing and I see people seated down. And I'm wondering, are these people listening? Are these people listening to the message? That we cannot afford to let. So I wanted to just tell you one small story that struck me when I was young. From a remote village where I come from in Zimbabwe, a dam was constructed. And we said, how lucky we are. We now have water for irrigation. We now have water for fish. These are natural resources that we're talking about. But one day, the fishermen were selling fish. My mama called the fisherman, can you come and see what we can buy? The fisherman said, the fish has gone up. Then my mom wondered, from the dam, what has changed? This should be ordinarily natural resource. But then I was too young to understand that the problem was not with the fishermen. These are things, the products of a broken global financial system that will tell you that your money has lost value against the US dollar. There are people who make these determination, these things that may impact you, that tomorrow when you want to get some wild fruits, you are told that the price has gone up. And it defies logic. And this is why we want to claim the seat that drives the agenda when it comes to any socio-economic policy reform process that put people first, and then the planet, and then the profits, not the vice versa order. So we also try to do storytelling, making sure that everyone is on board when it comes to movement building. So lastly, I want to end by saying, restating again what movement building is all about. It's just about appreciating that citizens are facing a common challenge that they rally together to say, let us change the way things are and make our voices count in the change process. And we are talking about the broken, unsustainable, inequitable global economic financial system that manifest themselves in this unfair debt situation. Earlier on, Jason made emphasis that part of the risk, the cost of finance, that is problematic for us when it comes to debt. If you look at it and dissect it, you find that a climate change, for instance, has made our economies more vulnerable. Making them more vulnerable means to say we are viewed as high-risk countries when it comes to borrowing. But who is behind climate change? It is not our economies, but it is those economies that have financialized the sector, that also put a risk premium, but at the same time downplay the role that they've played in contributing to the climate crisis as a macroeconomic risk for Africa. So if you look at the connectedness of things and how we should be pushing back, fighting, understanding the bigger part of the struggle, rallying everyone together. This is why, as part of movement building, the Stop the Bleeding campaign must embrace and is embracing the element of bringing all the pieces together for different movements, because the human resource, not the human resource, but the financial resource is all what is needed for progressive realization of all other forms of rights that you want. You may talk about elections. Without money, you may not have free and fair election. You must understand that. So I wanted to end here for now, that this is a big crisis that we are involved in, and I'm sure this has been part of the conversation and why precisely we are having this State and Development Academy, to appreciate that if we don't change our ways, if we don't do things differently, if we don't dismantle what exists right now, we will not go far. But someone is texting to me via WhatsApp. And normally, Isaac, forgive me, let me entertain WhatsApp a bit, because there are people who are familiar with me, so they communicate via WhatsApp as well. So someone says, Mkasiri, you cannot check out without giving us a small poem. Okay, I hear you. So let me do that in a minute, so that I accept the challenge. Right. So our coffers will spill. Political will is the pill for curing Africa's socio-economic ill. With the will, always there is a way. No one should make us sway as we accelerate towards the Africa we want. Our coffers will spill if we take the pill and gain the political will to cure financial flows so illicit. Thank you.
I'm coming from the Zambia Civil Society Organizations Data Alliance. So this is one of the, building from the comrades' presentation. So this is one of, or if not the largest debt movement in Zambia. So yeah, so I think, is this working? Okay. So who are we? So basically, I think even from the name of the organization, it's supposed to be a consortium of like-minded civil society organizations. But I think following the realization that civil society organizations are not the only stakeholders in this debt conversation, so we decided to actually expand our reach to include other institutions, think tanks, academia, and also just like-minded individuals, you know, who have passion about, you know, public finance issues in Zambia. So we came up with this alliance so that we can actually provide a platform for consolidated policy engagement on public finance management, which includes public debt. So I'm saying public finance management because we are not restricted to debt only. So we look at taxes. I know the comrade Mukasiri spoke about how that, you know, stop the bleeding is just not about, you know, illicit financial flows and all those things, but it has other issues which include debt. So the same with us, we also look at issues that have to do with public debt. So in terms of our establishment, we are not very young, but also not quite old. We were established in 2020, and obviously to provide oversight and policy engagement leadership on public finance issues in Zambia. So later in the presentation, we'll look into why we started this kind of platform in 2020. In terms of objectives, our broad objectives include contributing to public finance management processes. We also look at supporting the current debt restructuring conversations. I know Zambia has been in the highlights, obviously, in the past few months in terms of you know, the G20 Common Framework and the kind of progress that we have made in terms of debt restructuring. Then another important aspect in terms of our broad objectives includes the fight or the request for transparency and accountability. Very, very important. I think at one point in time, the citizens, including the CSOs, we didn't even know how much debt we actually owed as a country, which was very, very disappointing, if I should say. Yeah. So, I don't know if I have moved. Okay. So in terms of our membership, we are quite large in as much as we are fairly new, under 10 years, but we are quite large. We have over 50 organizations. These include CSOs, academic institutions, specifically academic departments like the economics department at the University of Zambia and other universities. We also have other think tanks and the like who are part of the alliance and help us in contributing to conversations in the alliance. So in terms of the chairmanship, the structure, so we have a chairman of the Debt Alliance, of the steering committee, and this organization is actually the Jesuit Center for Theological Reflection. I'm sure some of you may be aware, our colleagues, Mr. Martin and our sister, they are coming from JCTR. So those are the chairpersons. That is where the chairperson of the alliance actually sits. Then we are also very gender inclusive. So we don't only, we are very inclusive. So our vice chairperson, the position of the vice chairperson is held by the Zambia Alliance of Women. So they bring in that strong discussion and aspect as well. Then the secretariat is actually sitting at the Center for Trade Policy and Development. We also have colleagues from CTPD. Yes. That is where the secretariat is. And other members of the steering committee include CATS International. We have Caritas Zambia and Southern Africa Cross Borders Traders Association, including Professor Oliver Sasa, who is one of those eminent Zambians who are quite passionate about such issues like debt. So in terms of why we were formed, obviously we just didn't wake up and say, let us form a debt coalition, let us form an alliance. We were triggered by certain happenings, certain events in the country and on the continent. And I think key among them is the unsustainable debt servicing costs. I think we are all familiar with the fact that among the many countries on the continent and in the world that are facing debt challenges, I think Zambia is one of them and has been one of the most prominent, if I can say. Our debt servicing costs became quite unsustainable. And I think the largest signal that we got was that almost 50% of our 2022 national budget, which was presented the year before, was accounting for like 50% of it was being accounted for, or rather was being, taken to our debt servicing costs. So which meant that The other 50% was to be critical sectors, including sectors that were necessary for growing the economy. So what that meant was that there was weak investor confidence. We also had weak economic performance, which led to rising issues of inequalities, including poverty. Then obviously, I think somewhere before we were formed, we also did notice that Zambia was the first country to default on its debt payment sometime after COVID-19. So all those issues then came up, and then other key things included some low levels of transparency and accountability on debt. Like I had mentioned, at one point in time, we didn't even know how much debt we had as a country. Our ministry published statistics, the IMF published their own statistics, and there was a very huge variance, and now we didn't know which statistics were actually true. So I think such levels of transparency were quite unacceptable. Then another reason was the low levels of awareness. So we realized that most of the citizens, including organizations, were quite detached from the debt conversation. Many people didn't really understand what was going on. They didn't really understand what needed to be done. And so they were very detached, and government, operated in a way that they felt would suit them. So we felt there was need for that voice to represent organizations and the like. And so we had to come up with such a platform. Okay, so now I think after we established the platform, we had to come up with a plan in terms of how we were going to implement some of the activities of the alliance, and also how we were going to build, this coalition in Zambia, and what, how were we supposed to have effective results, So I think one of the things that we realized was that there was a gap in terms of having empirical results, or rather, research findings to actually inform advocacy, because we realized that at one point, especially the veterans, I'll call them the veterans, the veterans believed that the only way, whether we understand or not, the only way we can actually come out of this debt situation is to start campaigning for debt cancellation, without necessarily understanding what the implications are, without necessarily understanding what that would mean, and also what would need to be done. And I think many of them were basing their experiences from the HIPIC campaign program that Zambia was part of. And so we felt it was necessary for us to undertake some research so that we actually inform our advocacy activities, so that even as we begin to advocate, at least we are coming from an informed point. And these are just some of the pieces that we've done. So this list is not exhaustive. It's just, a summarized list of some of the pieces that we've done. And I think you would see one looking at the utilization of SDRs in Zambia, efficiency of the G20 Common Framework. I know the G20 Common Framework has been labeled, but we just wanted to interrogate how efficient this framework is, if at all it's efficient in providing debt restructuring for Zambia. We've also done quite a number of budget analysis. We've also done an analysis of the Public Debt Management Act, which is the new piece of legislation that is governing public debt management in Zambia. So I think another thing that we realized was that, meeting with well-learned individuals, organizations, those that have a certain level of understanding, becomes a little bit selfish, because we are not the only stakeholders in the debt conversation. There are people in the deepest parts of the country that are equally stakeholders, and that actually feel, the pinch and the pain of being heavily indebted the most. So we actually, through our other partners in the organization, or rather in the platform, we've done some community sensitization programs. So this one was done by the Civil Society for Poverty Reduction, which are actually members of the Alliance as well. And it was done in Monze. For those that know Zambia, Monze is a town just before the sugar plantation that Ishmael was talking about. So it's very close to what Ishmael said yesterday about the sweet nothings and all those activities. So just in other news, imagine such a big plantation making so much money, but if you look at the neighborhood, I'm sure you'll be able to connect with what Ishmael was talking about. It looks very dry and lifeless. So we decided to engage community members and just sensitize them on the debt issue, what it means, and what the roadmap is, and what that would mean for them. Then just quickly, we've also done some newspaper articles. So we've published newspaper articles. We actually run a page on the one of Zambia's private newspapers, the News Diggers. They have given us a column to publish every Monday on any pressing issue.
Having a sort of joint interest among all members of the coalition, or those who express interest in joining. And then, but with that, I just want to ask, seek your, find out your experience in terms of how you ensure that while you're bringing together different actors to form the coalition, yes, they'll have the interest to promote prudent debt management or whatever it is that you're asking for. So how do you ensure that you keep them actively participating? Not fall area, they're also, trying to contribute to achieving the goal of their lives.
Okay. That's the first question. Is there any other question? Yes.
Thanks. I had a direct question for the Zambian colleagues. It was not just you. And I just wanted to ask, what kinds of direct engagements, if any, have you managed to have with, one, the IMF officials, and two, the Chinese government, as one of your debtors? And then also, have you or any of your members undertaken any public protests, demonstrations, processions, etc.? I've seen all the other things you've done. Have you done anything in that nature? Thanks.
Okay. Peter, such questions need my experience now.
Yes, thank you. I'm just looking at it from a scenario point of view. I would like to get whether the other African countries seated here, civil society. We really had a lot of capacity building around civil society strengthening and all that. This churned a lot of leaders into government and holding very strategic positions in government. But we still remain complaining at civil society that things are not working. The government-civil society relationship is tainted in a way. So are there experiences on how this can be sustained if you have leadership going into government, taking it as strategic towards our work? That is one. And then secondly, okay, let me suspend that. Let me suspend that for now.
Okay. Okay, so there are three questions. The first one.
So I mean, just building up on Don's question. I mean, has in the case of Zambia, has there been opportunities to engage with non-traditional stakeholders? Because of course it's important that you build coalition with civil society and like-minded, but what about domestic creditors, domestic private sector who also feel the crunch of the debt crisis in Zambia? Has there been an opportunity for the Alliance to do that in order to build collective goodwill, which would then perhaps spill over to the streets with protests and so on from all facets of society in Zambia?
So there are about four questions. Yes, yes.
Let me ask, because my colleague from Kenya maybe forgot, but I just wanted to hear from you. First of all, to applaud you for the work that you're doing around this concept of debt. But as we understand, the concept of debt is quite a complex conversation. And the biggest people who bear the burden of the effects of the debts that countries are now incurring are the young people. In Kenya, for example, we'll be told that even the unborn child has a debt that he owes or she owes to whichever the country that gave us that debt. So which mechanisms have you been able to use to meaningfully engage, especially the young people? Of course, I've seen through social media and all that, but not all young people on social media. We use TV interviews, but in Kenya, such kinds of news will always come at the tail end. The most prime time, which is the first bulletin before the break, always politics. And then such kinds of news will come after, towards sports. So I don't know how you've been able to...
Other news.
Yeah, other news. So I don't know how creatively you've been able to make use of these forums to ensure that the young people are meaningfully engaged, as well as the rural population, because you realize that, again, most people in the rural areas, with this very complex discussion about debt, they might not be able to really understand. How are you engaging with them to be a part of this as important stakeholders as well?
Okay, thank you so much. So I'll start with the first question with regards to how we are sustaining engagements for non-state actors within the Debt Alliance. I think one of the things that has helped over the last 3 years has been from a point of recognition in terms of the varying strengths that the civil society organizations have. So within the Alliance, we have civil society organizations that are very strong when it comes to advocacy that is related to social accountability. Within the Civil Society Debt Alliance, there are also a few organizations that are quite strong when it comes to research, and these are really few, about 2 or 3 of the organizations. And others, it's been a process of trying to build their capacity. There's also a challenge in the sense that it's not all the organizations that have got work that directly focuses on public debt. So you'd find that public debt is just a sub-component of everything else that they are doing or primarily focusing on. A practical example is what happened yesterday. So on Friday last week, the minister presented the national budget, and immediately after that presentation, the CSO Debt Alliance received a request to make an intervention because the ministry was scheduled to have a public forum where they are going to engage various stakeholders and provide further engagement with regards to the substantive details of the budget. So as a way of, traditionally you might have expected that the coordinator or somebody else should go and make an intervention. But as a way of facilitating for active participation, we ended up requesting one of the members of the Debt Alliance to make that intervention, of which that member was far from the secretariat. That is one of the ways. The other ways of facilitating for active engagement has been through mobilization of resources to finance the operations of the Debt Alliance. So in situations where we have an opportunity to mobilize resources that allows for sub-granting, we normally prefer that mode, because in that case you have a number of Alliance members that are actively now working on debt-related issues. The second one was a question on whether we have engaged in conversations with the International Monetary Fund or the Chinese. With regards to engagement with the International Monetary Fund, yes, we've had engagements as the Debt Alliance, and these engagements have been twofold. Some of them have been initiated by the Debt Alliance themselves because maybe would want to seek clarifications on some issues, especially during the time that they were engaging with the Zambian government in coming up with extended credit facility for Zambia. So information was quite scanty around that time. When you try to engage the Zambian government, they are not providing information. When you engage the IMF, they were equally not providing a lot of information, but it was providing us with bits and pieces of information that would help us to come up with ways of engaging. Have we had the same opportunity in terms of engaging with the Chinese? No, we haven't. Have we reached out? Yes, several times. They actually don't respond. They don't engage. So we've written to them a number of times requesting for opportunities to engage.
But to the embassy or to Beijing?
It's largely been to the embassy in our case. But there's another player that has seemingly been seeking relevance with regards to the conversation, which is India, through the embassy. So apparently, because of India's India is the president of the G20 Common Framework, right? So they've been trying to use that aspect in terms of actively engaging on debt. So we've been written to more than 5 times, being requested to meet with an ambassador from the Indian High Commission or the Indian Embassy. And in many cases, it has been after seeing what would have written around public debt, maybe in a Monday opinion, and they would want to find out some information, and equally requesting that beyond maybe looking at China, because by then the big push was that China was dragging in terms of getting on board with regard to the restructuring of Zambia's debt. So the push from India was that you should also recognize that India can actually play a big role in terms of helping Zambia restructure its debt. So that has been the case. Other than just meeting the IMF separately, we've had tripartite meetings that would bring the Ministry of Finance, the IMF, and the civil society organizations into a space to discuss Zambia's debt. Have there been occasions where we have protested, gone to the street? So there are 2 scenarios. In terms of the current government that we have, and there's also the previous regime that we had. So between the 2, there are varying distinctions in terms of the way we've been engaging. For the previous regime, the immediate past, it was a very brutal regime. Engaging with them was actually very hard. Within that regime, yes, we did a number of protests. So we had come up with a campaign on debt under the theme, Debt Concerns Me. So we had taglines like, they borrow, we pay. And this is the message that we are putting out to the public as a way of trying to get this message out to the public. But it came with a lot of consequences. So part of the consequences led to leading CSO actors getting arrested. But I also had members of my team getting arrested and spending a night in police cells because of the same campaigns. But other than that, we would also stage campaigns like picketing Parliament, awaiting Parliament when they are opening. We would go there. I took part in one, but it ended in a bad way because we had political cadres, those followers for political parties, who came and stoned us just right outside Parliament. But in the current government, it's different. So in the current government, it's the one that is actually more forthcoming. So they've developed this approach, especially the Ministry of Finance, because partly in the last regime we had serious challenges with regards to provision of information. So now we have a new system where there's a lot of information that is actually being provided to the public, to an extent that there is need for a shift in approach from demanding for information to now reading and making sense of the information that is being provided. So we are now getting into a space where researchers like Peter hardly see the agency of writing to the Ministry of Finance to request for information, because every time they do a case research on their website, most of the information that they are looking for is already provided. Unless there's information that is missing, then it becomes necessary for you to start writing to them. In terms of the type of information that you find there, you'll find a simplified breakdown of all people that we owe. You'll find a simplified breakdown of the current state of public debt. You'll find information with regards to the borrowing plans per year and things like that. In short, there is a significant shift with regards to the provision of information. Beyond provision of information for platforms like websites, there's also a deliberate approach that they have put in place to engage the citizens. So on a monthly basis, on a quarterly basis, and also now extending to provinces, they are going out to engage, to create platforms. So that's a slight difference in terms of our context. We do not necessarily need to go on the streets to start throwing stones to obtain some information in the current dispensation. But we might have to spend a lot more time to make sense of the information that is being provided for us to effectively engage. With regards to leadership taking positions in government, yes, yes, it does happen. especially with the transition of every government. CTPD was one of the targets. I think at the transition of the new government, the institution had been approached. They were looking for 3 people to leave the institution so that they can join Foreign Affairs. My immediate deputy took up a job. One of our researchers, who was replaced by Matrina, was equally offered an opportunity to be an assistant director under Foreign Affairs. But some of these opportunities that they come, they also bring a lot of competition. It brings in a debate of, can I take up a lucrative job in a very strategic ministry like Ministry of Foreign Affairs, or remain with Isaac, who is not sure where the next funding will come from? So a lot of the people, especially our researchers, because they are visible, they are commenting on issues, they are a target. We have now gotten to a point where even the central bank has now established a relationship with us, where they are requesting that instead of them advertising, they would want to directly be poaching from some of our researchers. And they have already gotten 2 so far. So you can't have a local entity like CTPD now competing with a central bank in terms of... yes.
I mean, I know there's a point on operational aspects
yeah.
of what you're describing of the government trying to, approach staff members or colleagues and comrades from the movement. But I wonder, in this sense of movement building, taking away from this NGOization that Stefano talked about, is this an opportunity where perhaps these individuals still remain sympathetic and empathetic to the movement, that these are corridors of power that they now have a fast lane to, that the movement and the alliance can access? So the colleague who's at Foreign Affairs will have almost first-hand information about how strategy with China, he can facilitate a meeting with China if he wanted to, or if they wanted to. And similarly with the central bank, on issues of monetary policy, interest rates, exchange rates, things like that. Can the movement or the coalition in Zambia manifest itself to look at this as an opportunity in that, because we've talked about that access quite a bit, and it came up even, I think, the question we were asked about CSOs organizing ourselves. Is there a way we can strategize like that?
So I tend to look at it both as an opportunity and as a challenge. In terms of it being an opportunity, we've already seen some fruits bearing, in the sense that some of the colleagues that have left, if there's an issue that is happening within the CSO space, like last week we had a situation where there was a concern with regards to the power purchase agreements that the Zambian government has been signing lately. And one of the civil society organizations has been trying to seek a meeting with the Energy Regulation Board, but they had not been forthcoming. So one of the colleagues that had been working in the space was able to immediately pick it up to say, okay, leave this up to me. I'll set up an appointment for you with the Energy Regulation Board. That is a benefit. But besides that, we've also had some of our colleagues still coming back. Let's say there's a process that you're undertaking and they are free over the weekend. Some of them have joined some of our processes and participated actively to an extent that they would correct you to say, this information that you are working with is actually outdated. Try to use this kind of information. So that would be a benefit. In terms of a challenge, well, it takes long to groom a staff. When you lose one, it takes you backwards, and it takes long for you to get one to the level that you can confidently allow them to run on their own. So you ultimately then become like a training ground. When they become ripe, they are poached. So that is also a challenge. I think in terms of, what was the other question? Private sector engagement. So with regards to domestic debt situation or domestic arrears, this far, what we have done has largely focused on research. It has also focused on edging, like if you look at the statement we put out yesterday, we've raised the concern after we looked at the amount of money that government has allocated in the budget to dismantle domestic arrears against the total. We've raised the concern that that does not show commitment towards supporting that challenge. But with regards to meeting them in some space and having conversations, we are yet to do that. Yeah. Yeah, I think that would... Young people. Okay, so one of them is so there are 3 programs that I can cite. So there's My Zambian Dream Poetry. This one targets creatives, getting creative, let's say poets, and then theming a competition around public debt as a way of trying to ensure that we tap into their creativity, but also their audiences on social media platforms, because news now is on social media. By the time people are tuning into TV, they've already read through most of these. I think the other one is an annual event that we normally host. It's dubbed as the People's Budget. So in the People's Budget, we call on young people and give them a scenario. Let's assume that you are the Minister of Finance. How would your budget look like for an upcoming year? So that competition is equally just meant to mobilize young people, engage them in the budget process, and get to know some of the key issues around the budget. There's also another initiative that we run every after 5 years. It's dubbed as the People's President. It's targeting young people equally, and giving them an opportunity that if they were to govern the country, what would their policies and programs look like? So they'll compete, but the competition is largely driven on social media, TV stations, the traditional ones, of course. And that's largely been our way of reaching out to young people. Not completely perfect, I should say.
Because I was asking that because, young people, especially the different generations of young people, interact with social media differently.
Yeah.
And that's why when you look at, for example, WhatsApp, they've come up with very many strategies to keep people engaged. For example, you look at status, it just stays for about just 30 seconds maximum. And you know the duration that any young person can take to follow through anything would be shorter. It's about 30 seconds. Have you tried to go through such other platforms? And in Kenya, for example, the memes tell a lot. If you look at people in Kenya, most of the time they'll be spending on their WhatsApp, checking on their WhatsApp status. The memes that are most funny, then are the ones that are most shared. Maybe that is also an avenue that people could explore and see how can we use the very different means of communication to ensure that this information then gets to the people. Because I know Twitter Spaces in Kenya, you organize one, you'll only have experts in that Twitter space. You can't have the young people concentrate for over an hour. So I think we need to just think of those different ways. Maybe as a consortium, can we think about having a site for memes, for example, but which communicates to the issue about it, where people can visit to download the funny memes and at the same time gain information through such engagement. So those are the kind of ways that maybe we should be thinking of how to engage these young people who are currently not so into the long conversations, long discussions, unless you are giving them time.
No, I agree, and we just constantly have to look for ways and means of packaging content so that it's not just attractive, but ultimately it can be consumed by the right audiences. So unless we have any other major questions, because we are coming close to the end of our session, is there any burning question?
It's not a question,
Yeah.
it's a comment. Yesterday we had an interesting session about how to influence the AU and how to come together to do that. And I think this is a perfect example of a beginning point. So I guess my comment is there an opportunity to leverage off this experience that you have to build an African coalition towards that? And maybe does such an alliance exist in any other African country? And do you see yourselves as a responsible authority to inspire other countries to take on this framework that you started?
Okay. I think that's where Aphrodite comes in. So we have presence at national level, but we also tap into Aphrodite for regional processes. Of course, there've been a push that we should start considering extending our footprint to SADC and stuff, but that's a conversation for another day. Right now, we do have Aphrodite that has actively been providing leadership at a regional level until they fall short to think of an alternative. So, colleagues, with that, we are coming to the end of our session, but remember, we have Mukasiri online. Maybe if I can just quickly allow him to give some closing remarks, even as we take seats. Mukasiri.
Thanks, Isaac, and thanks, Aphrodite, for facilitating this important conversation, the Data and Development Academy, and also for the everyone in the room for the engagement. I wanted to close by saying, yes, we have had conversation about critical minerals, that Africa is resource rich. And to us, we should look at these minerals as the sunshine for development, but with an understanding that soon even the sunshine turns into a harsher part of daylight. And the daylight also transforms from the sunshine to sunset. And then day is substituted by night. What am I trying to say here is there is an opportunity that the whole world is looking at Africa to support with critical minerals. And at the same time, it is the same continent that they condemn in terms of being impaired financially. The two do not match. We have to take our spot and ensure that if we are so useless or less useful, maybe useless is pretty strong, let's reverse it. If we're of less use to the world, can they do without us? So why would they trap us into debt, yet they need us most? So I think this is a big opportunity, not only to look at the challenges that we've bogged down in form of debt, but also in terms of foresighting what it holds for us in terms of transforming the continent, because we have talked about assets as we conclude. Yes, this is the financial capital we are talking about, which we are struggling with. But there are other forms of assets that Africa can leverage very well. Natural resources, I've been talking about sunshine minerals for development. It's human resource. We are told about how critically the diasporan fund remittances are playing a critical role in terms of anchoring development. But even beyond that, how much are we losing in terms of our human resource base that is impairing our economic growth? We talk about the relational capital. I think it is important that Africa must unite. We cannot move globally in this world and make our voice count if we don't build that soft capital that is needed for us to engage as one. So it's very critical. And then lastly, that technological capital. We should be innovative. As Africa, part of the debt that we are suffering is not because we do not have enough assets, but perhaps it's just a liquidity challenges from manipulation. How do we ensure that we leverage on our own in terms of transforming the fortunes of the continent? So we move from that holistic understanding to solve the challenges that we are facing. So once again, we have sunshine minerals, and sunshine turns into the harsher part of daylight, gets hot, it gets to sunset, and then day turns into night. But we must ensure that this opportunity must not be squandered. Thank you.